So welcome back to Fatal Female Friday. Today's case we're gonna be doing Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Sorry if my hair looks different. had to take braids down because I had them in too long, but I tried the best I can. Anyway, so let's go ahead and get started. For some reason, I guess because this was back like almost 300 years ago, it's not exactly known as to when she was born for some reason, but most sources say 1787. And so, from what I've gathered from most of the sources I have, Madame Delphine Lalaurie, she was born Marie Delphine McCartney on March 17th, 1787. Marie actually, well, her legal first name was Marie, but she goes by Delphine. So I guess we're going to call her Delphine. So Delphine came from a wealthy French family. Apparently, when she was 5 years old, she got baptized because it was believed that she was gonna die. Which at first it sounded crazy, but remember back then, apparently kids were dying left and right pretty young because life expectancy wasn't as long. You had illnesses and all that stuff. One of the craziest things about it is her family, like her father, her uncle, like just males in her family in general. They got together with free women of color because remember back then slavery still existed, right? So interracial children with them. And I guess those children were technically considered freed because their mother was freed. So obviously Delphine, because of this, she had family members that were half white, half black. And so it's not exactly known how she felt about it, but considering this was back in the day and most people obviously were like against that, we can assume that she owned slaves herself, she probably didn't even like it. Another thing that would probably never work in modern day America is that when she was 13, she actually got married to this officer. Apparently, his name was Don Ramon D. Lopez y Angulo. And so, yeah, he was a Spanish officer. Around the time, like, she was like 13 or 14, and he was 35.
Wait a damn minute. Wait a damn.
And apparently was already a widow because his wife had died before, but I can't exactly find how she died. It's not known if like one of them pursued the other, like if she pursued him or he pursued her, or who was arranged by the parents. Because again, she's from a wealthy family, he's wealthy. The parents could have been like, let's put them together as like a power thing, you know. This is before they got married, by the way. Apparently, the relationship has started to become sexual.
What's going on? Y'all are going to jail. Period. What?
Before marriage, which back then was like a big no-no. And so they kind of had to get married because they were doing sexual stuff before they were married. And while obviously that would never work in the United States today, apparently the age of consent back then was between 10 to 16, depending on what state you were in and the year. So apparently she was within the age of consent, despite him literally being old enough to be her father.
I am disgusted.
Apparently Spain has some laws set up that if you were trying to marry somebody that like wasn't from Spain, you had to get permission to marry them. In which her husband Don Ramon, he did try to get permission to get married because he knew how it worked. And this is back when, like way back, you had to wait like months to get a letter in the mail. And so he had sent her a request. He hadn't heard back. And so like on June 11th of one year, he had apparently 1800, he had married her on her parents' plantation. And so Spain found out, they weren't pleased. And so he had to go up there to basically like redeem himself. They were married for 7 months before it got back and said that they were actually rejected, and he had to come back to Spain to answer for what he did, because he basically went ahead and did it anyway before getting approval, because he was so sure that they would say yes, because apparently again he had that high ranking. So he went back to Spain. He went back to Spain apparently during in October. He wrote a secretary that was there and he got exiled. As a result of him going to get married without legal permission, I guess you could say. After being exiled, apparently he wrote that same secretary who he wrote to originally to get him like out of the situation he was in, and somehow he actually got pardoned in 1804, and he got back on this boat to go back to be with his new wife, and that apparently that ship capsized and he died. So that's the end of the first husband. And Delphine is already a widow, and she just turned a legal adult, which I guess what we would call a legal adult, like 18, 19-ish, right? Delphine actually requested that Don Ramon be like preserved in salt so that it would be easier to like bury him, which I don't even know if that actually works. So yeah, Delphine was actually unfortunately pregnant with Don Ramon's child, or was believed to be, on the way back to New Orleans. And so, like, while in New Orleans, she gave birth to her daughter Marie. You see why I'm calling Delphine Marie, because she now has a daughter whose first name's Marie. Makes it less difficult. About 4 years later, she actually married a name called Jean Paul Blanc. He was apparently a lawyer and a slave trader. She was in her 20s, like I said, and he was in his 40s.
And
So almost twice her age, could be her dad. You know, the usual. Apparently, he got $33,000 as a dowry when the mother died a little bit over a month before the wedding. And so apparently as a wedding gift, they got one plantation and 52 slaves, which apparently back then was like really good. And then Delphine's father, as a wedding gift, he had gave them another plantation, 26 slaves, and some furniture.
damn!
There's like a problem because her first husband, Don Ramon, he somehow left behind what is equivalent to like $2.5 million in debt behind.
Damn!
And she wasn't aware of the debt.
How, Sway?
Take a few.
But because at the time he like accumulated those debts, I guess, she was his wife, so it was kind of like her responsibility to take care of it. Even though she wasn't the one that caused it, but she's married, so she kind of has to take care of it. So obviously to sell it, she sells all his stuff, and even a townhouse that, despite her living in, it was under his name. And I guess that townhouse was worth enough to like, the debt was just gone just like that. Apparently there was a country house on the risk of being sold to other people, and so they had to go buy it as soon as it got on the market in order to like keep it, because obviously if we buy it, then we get to keep it. 1808, the same year that she married John Blanc, apparently Thomas Jefferson, who was the president at the time, he made it illegal for slaves to be imported. So you could have slaves in the U.S. Any slaves that are still in the U.S. you can keep, but do not bring any more slaves into the country. I don't know if there's too much, but around the time there were like slave revolts going on and stuff, and so there was like a whole thing going on in Haiti, and so I don't know if it was because of that or just there was already too many in the United States, and we couldn't keep track of everybody. Like, so obviously because we can't import any more slaves, because slavery didn't end for almost a good century. So, but of course they didn't know it was going to end. Hell, they probably thought it was never going to end, but it was not in their lifetime. But John and Delphine would go on to have like 4 kids together, like 3 daughters and a son. It said within the span of like 4 years, 8 slaves died, which apparently, despite, you know, like the low life expectancy rate and them being slaves, apparently back in New Orleans, you got to treat your slaves better than you would anywhere else in the South. Like, you have to treat them like they were your family, but you still had like rules you had to go by as to how to treat said slaves. For them to die that much, obviously, is going to cause suspicion. Because apparently all 8 of them, which is not much known about them, but all 8 of the people that died, apparently they were either still children or they were within the childbearing years. So it wasn't like they died of old age.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
John would die like 7 years later, so making Delphine a widow twice. And she would meet Leonard Louis Nicholas Lalaurie, her thankfully final husband, and that's actually how she got her last name that we know her as Lalaurie, because she was married to him when she passed away. She actually met him because apparently he was like a doctor. They called him a doctor, but we would call this person a chiropractor nowadays, because he was dealing with people that had like backs that like were messed up. Like, they called them hunchbacks, and her daughter's believed to have a condition that we believe now at least to be scoliosis. And so now the roles are reversed. She's about in her 40s and he's in his 20s. She gets pregnant by Louis outside of wedlock, which again is a big no-no.
Unacceptable!
So they had to get a shotgun wedding. However, on the certificate, they have to say they were married 6 months before, because apparently at this point, when they do get married, she's like 5 months pregnant. So if we say we got married 6 months before, it's like, oh, the baby was conceived right after they're married. Which apparently was like common, but it was okay because you were married. So if it's conceived right after marriage, no judgment. 1832, 1832, they actually moved to a mansion in New Orleans, Louisiana, which on Royal Street, which is still there to this day. She was known to for her big parties that she would throw with for other socialites because she was a socialite herself. So what socialites do, apparently they throw big parties. Unfortunately, that year, her and her husband would separate after she made accusations that she was being physically abused. But also, that wasn't the only scandal that was going on. Apparently, wellness checks for the slaves, because again, New Orleans apparently had rules as to how you should be treating your slaves and stuff, had to be done regularly on these slaves because there were rumors that she was mistreating them and actually beating them. In order to keep up her good image, it's believed that she actually freed 2 of the slaves, but it's later said somewhere that one of the slaves was actually owned by her former husband. But yeah, so one of them got let go because it was on her husband's will, so she kind of had to do it anyway. And the second one, again, just to keep up her image. And so because of this, she had to treat slaves nice in public to make it sound like she actually cared about them, but she really couldn't care anything about them. So, okay, and this is the part where it gets crazy. So there was this 12-year-old girl named Leah, and she was combing Delphine's hair, because remember, she's a socialite. She's what you would consider noble, so she's not gonna do it herself, so she has someone do it for her. And so Leah's over combing her hair. She snags a part of her hair, and obviously it hurts if you ever had your hair snagged. I know I definitely have that feeling. And so Delphine basically snaps. She grabs the whip. She chases Leah. They run all the way up to the roof, and Leah falls to her death. It's said that they actually buried Leah's body in the backyard, of the backyard of the house, and apparently a neighbor had saw Leah on the roof with Delphine, but she turned away, and she didn't even know if she was pushed, she jumped her own will, or she just accidentally fell. Another thing that's frustrating is because Leah was a slave, and Delphine was this noble woman. She only got charged $300 for the death of this 12-year-old girl.
What? What the fuck?
And also got 9 of her own slaves taken away from her, which I guess is good. But unfortunately, her family somehow, because remember, these are noble people, so they got money like that. They're able to go back and buy all 90 slaves and then give them back to Delphine after they legally just got taken away from her. And the government didn't even try, the people didn't even try to take it away from her again. They just let her keep them. After Leah's death, I guess a significant number of slaves kept coming in, a lot of them kept coming in, but none of them were seen coming out.
That's suspicious. That's weird.
Or leaving, or whatever. So that obviously raised suspicion, as it should. Again, she was still throwing these parties, and people started declining her invitations because of this. And then not only that, her own children actually tried to were actually kind of human and tried to feed the slaves, but she was over here beating them and abusing them. They tried to feed the slaves. If you thought Leah would be the only death that Delphine was involved in, unfortunately, that's not the case either. There was this man who apparently jumped out of the 3rd-story window, I believe, and obviously he fell to his death, and so they sealed the window that he jumped out of. And remember, this mansion is still up to this day, and that window that he jumped out of all those years ago is still sealed up to this day. Okay, now this is the part where it gets interesting. Apparently on April 10th, 1834, a fire basically broke out in the kitchen, and Delphine was apparently having a party. And so instead of people just leaving, instead of people just exiting the house and just leaving and stopping the party altogether, we're still gonna have the party, but we're gonna move it outside. So at least they were smart enough to go outside and not just stay in with the fire. Anyway, so then firefighters get there. They go into the kitchen area of the mansion, right? And there's this woman. She's in her 70s. She's chained up to the stove. She's really badly burned. And so somehow miraculously she was still alive.
How, Sway? Take a few.
And so they ask her what happened, And she basically confessed that she started the fire in a suicide attempt. She was over here exposing her, like, oh yeah, she's doing, like, oh, there's this attic, and if you go up there, like, you're never gonna come back, which apparently, if you went up there, you didn't come back just alive. So the people, they're like, oh, well, now we gotta go to this attic, because she's saying, like, there's so many bad things that could be in the attic. So, of course, they go to the attic, and they find at least 7 slaves chained up and mutilated. Many of them actually threw up due to the smell of human flesh, because remember, they had been there for a while. And so, apparently, like, eyes were gouged out, fingernails taken off, ears hanging by somehow literally a thread. They found, like, apparently some of them, their mouths were sewn shut, but with feces inside. It was unknown whether it was like human feces or like animal feces.
I am disgusted.
And then there was 2 of them who they had like a body part switch, like the male body part went to the female, and then she took his. There was a woman who somehow had her own intestines. There's a source that said that wasn't her intestines, which I believe, but somehow, let's say hypothetically this is true, somehow her own intestines were wrapped around her body and she was still alive. There was one that obviously, can't forget, there's one that looks like a crab. Her body was broken to basically make her look like a crab. There was another one, it said she was a spider. There was one person, their skin was like cut, like their face was cut. It was cut into like quadrants, which quadrants means 4. So their skin was like peeled back from each little quadrant. And he thought like the muscles were like pulsing, the skin being open, I guess. I don't know. And then they get closer, they put a light on it, they realize that's not the muscles doing that. Those are maggots doing that. And if that isn't bad enough, apparently there were some of them that had like holes in their head. Like, I don't know how big these holes are, but apparently big enough to put like a stick or a spoon and basically like stir their brains around.
Disgusting!
And so it's later revealed that Delphine and her husband were like doing experiments on the slaves, like medical experiments to see like what would work and what didn't. At least that's what they claim. They checked the yard and find like 2 bodies, one of which is like apparently definitely a child, which is believed to be like Layla, because again, even though Layla was 12, she still was like a kid, so that may have been her remains. And it's actually said in one of the sources that was Layla's remains. After all this was discovered, the husband basically was asked like, what did he know? Because obviously he's married to her, so he has to know something. And he basically said,
Mind your business, that's all. Mind your business.
The surviving slaves, the one they found alive, instead of like taking them to like the local hospital, get them medical attention, and like basically put them up for display at the local police station.
Bruh.
And so because of this, like over 4,000 people came to come see them, I guess to like convince themselves that it really happened.
Damn!
Apparently 2 of the slaves actually died. With $4.3 million in, I guess, today's money, they somehow, the Lalaurie family was somehow able to like keep the police from having the public attack them. And so somehow with that money, 98 police officers were apparently bribed and were made to make barricaders on both sides of the street until like 10:30 the next morning.
Hello, I like money.
So apparently 10:30 next morning rolls around and they were in the process of actually leaving. They had a carriage, they had a slave who had a whip and a gun. I guess the whip was for the horse and the gun was for anybody that tried to like attack them. For some reason actually left a butler behind who was also a slave, and apparently he was supposed to take all the blame.
Oh wow. Oh wow.
The husband, Leonard, he came out with like a pistol, and Madam, like Delphine, she didn't come out with anything. She actually came out just with the audacity to wave at the people like she had done nothing wrong. So basically, and then after this, it's said that, because remember, they started off in New Orleans, right? So then after New Orleans, they left from New Orleans to go to Mandersville, which is also in Louisiana, then to Mobile, Alabama, then to New York City, then finally to Paris. They stopped in Mobile, Alabama to like stay with like a niece and her husband. Sorry, they stopped in Mandersville, Louisiana to stay with her niece and her husband for a little bit. She then signed over the estate to her oldest daughter, because she had like 2 daughters at this point. Her oldest daughter's husband, so not her, because women didn't have a lot of influence, a lot of say back then. Leonard signed his estate over to the other daughter's husband, so both daughters finally have like full. So the daughters The daughter's husbands, though, but the daughters, they have full financial power over whatever money both Delphine and Leonardo had. Days later, apparently there were like noise coming from like unearthly noises made. They called a priest, and the priest was like,
Oh, hell no!
April 16th, so about almost a week after the fire and Delphine's actions were discovered. The priest somehow agrees. He gets like 6 soldiers because he thinks like he doesn't know what it is, but somehow soldiers are gonna help. He gets the soldiers. They go in for about 15 minutes and they hear things that are otherworldly or unearthly, as quoted.
Hey there, demons. It's me, your boy.
Now, regarding Delphine, most sources actually say that she died there. Like, she died in Paris. Remember, I said she went to Paris, allegedly last, but apparently it's said that she may have came back under a different name with, like, a new identity, trying to, like, with a different face, and try to live her life in New Orleans, but still continuing her torture, despite already being caught.
How, Sway?
Take a few.
One of her son-in-laws has said that she actually did live the rest of her days in Paris, but instead of like the luxury things that she was used to, because remember, she was a socialite. She actually had to live in a modest house, which is not even bad, and like a modest income, modest life.
Boy tipping!
One of the daughters actually claimed that they got a letter from Delphine, but never actually like showed it to the public, so like nobody else apparently saw it except this daughter.
Bullshit.
2 of the families are actually said to have actually moved to Paris to be with Delphine. Her other daughter, because apparently she had 3, like she came to visit her, but it was only like temporarily. And then she had a son who was going to attending Yale, which obviously that's an Ivy League school, the school to get into. He dropped out to go actually come to live to Paris with his mom. And so one of the random things that I didn't think of was that Louis's father, Louis being the husband, Louis's father apparently had died in 1842, and you know, like, because that's his father, he should be mentioned in the obituary, because apparently he was close to his father. Well, he was not mentioned in the obituary because apparently his family had lost faith in him.
And
Louis would apparently die in 1863 and apparently is still buried in somewhere in Havana. So apparently before that, Louis had actually Delphine, and so she was worried because like her son was using her money and her uncle's money to use like for himself. And so obviously, despite this like obviously a setback from what she was used to, she was still trying to spend like lots and spend like lavish because she felt she deserved it, because that's what she was used to, that's what she was born to. And so Delphine was over here having to borrow money from banks just to be able to keep up the lifestyle.
I'm broke, nigga, I'm broke!
The bank actually apparently stopped giving her money once they found out what the true intentions were, because she apparently was sending letters back to New Orleans asking her son-in-law like where her money was.
Where's my money? Where's my money?
And so her son had obviously volunteered as tribute to get it back, because I guess he believed he was going to get a little cut if he did.
I volunteer as tribute.
Somehow, despite there being like Delphine, her 2 daughters, her 2 husbands, there were like 5 able-bodied adults. Those other 4 don't want to work because they're relying on her and her money. I guess like, well, technically the bank's money, but you know what I mean. The son apparently told Delphine's son-in-law that she was sick and she was planning on coming back to. She was sick and she planned on coming back to New Orleans to get her money.
I can't go out. I'm sick.
But again, like I said, like those 4 able-bodied adults, somehow none of them thought of getting a job. They thought they could always rely on her as long as I live with her.
What's not clicking? What's not clicking?
There's times when
Delphine apparently had a brother, and so he was staying in the house and he was being an introvert, which is nothing wrong being an introvert. I consider myself an introvert, and he basically stopped his socialite days after that scandal that ruined his family's name. During his 50s, he apparently got with a girl who's 18, like I guess like freshly 18, and they never got married despite like literally nothing stopping them. And he would give her property and slaves, which apparently was like a really like nice gift back then. And so in 1839, apparently they ended up having a girl named Marie. And so instead of marrying her, because again they just had this child out of wedlock, he gives her $21,000 and some valuables to take care of the child. The following year, apparently the three of them, so the brother, his girlfriend, and the child they had together, they went on this trip to Europe, and they left someone named Auguste in charge. The brother apparently went to like the opera and the theater often, mostly with his daughter. So apparently, March of the following year, March of the following year they were going to go to Italy. Before they went to Italy, he somehow got his daughter this 2-story building back in New Orleans. And so apparently 6 months after that, a son was born, but he did not get the last name McCartney or any special treatment because he believes that he was not the father of that. He was not the father of that child, but was the father of the first one.
That's tea, actually.
Louis would end up actually dying 5 years later at 62. He only left 1/4 of everything to his daughter. The son got nothing, the girlfriend got nothing, and everything else went to his sister, Delphine, under the assumption that she will use what he gave her responsibly and release all the slaves that he had.
There ain't f***ing funny, Tammy. Don't start laughing.
Despite slavery still being legal and her still being entitled. In today's money, it said he would be worth a little over $7 million. So obviously the daughter getting like a fourth of that, it's believed that she got almost $2 million. Despite his obvious generosity, $5 million, which again, that's $5 million today. But obviously, apparently you get a lot more for $5 million back then. Anyway, so $5 million was not enough for her, the lifestyle she was trying to live.
Bitch. The door.
She actually argued that his daughter actually had already gotten a fourth of what he had when he was alive, so why should she be getting more, even though despite that's his little offspring and you didn't have to get anything? And so she obviously lost and she had to settle what she had, even though again, it said Delphine apparently died 2 years later after some sort of sickness, and she ends up being buried in like a third-class cemetery. And cats for some reason would just randomly show up at her grave at like any time of the day, like any day. Just random times a day. I don't know what exactly that means, but I thought that was interesting to mention. So, apparently her body was transported back to New Orleans after she had died. And so it was believed that her body was transferred back to New Orleans because there was a cemetery that was under like her son's family's name. So that way she could be buried with the family. It's actually said to be a family tomb because, you know, some families actually want to be buried together instead of in separate cemeteries or like separate like plots. And so yeah, but apparently the first person to get buried there didn't get buried there till like 1884, and apparently it was one of her great granddaughters. Remember how I mentioned the slaves that ended up surviving and the ones that didn't survive? Well, apparently, after it happened, it obviously got mentioned in the paper and all that good stuff, but it only got mentioned like 3 days, and it's not exactly known what happened to them afterwards. It is believed that they were resold back into slavery, or it just could have been let go, but I honestly believe that with slavery not ending for like at least another 30 years, they were probably put back into the market and sold again. Hospital records were apparently checked, but none of them were checked for slaves, which I don't know why. She apparently owed 30 slaves, because she apparently had 30 slaves at the time that the fire was discovered and all that good stuff, which apparently back then was like a lot, because most people probably didn't have even half of that. She's supposed to have 30, but only 11 were sold. That means 19 is missing. So that means almost 2/3 of the slaves you're supposed to have are gone. Like, they're missing.
2 + 2 is 4, right? And 5 + 5 is 10. Okay. What the fuck is this? I didn't see.
And so New Orleans, because again, like I said, they actually care about their slaves. That's the point. They actually had really strict rules when it came to like keeping track of slaves. So you couldn't just kill them out of nowhere and get away with it. You had to have a track to where they went. And so obviously 19 slaves, 2/3 of the 30 you're supposed to have disappearing, that obviously doesn't look good on you. One thing I should mention is the house was originally sold in 1837, but apparently there's like a new owner there like every couple of years. It has been everything from a furniture store, a school for African Americans, a bar. Apparently Nicolas Cage had actually owned the place back in the early 2000s, like 2007 to 2009, but apparently he had like some bankruptcy problems and had to like sell it, and then apparently 2000.
I declare Bankruptcy!
There was a private owner that got it, and apparently the private owner still has it to this day, and so therefore, because of that, it's not open access to the public. Fast forward back to 1953, I guess they were doing like renovations of the house or something to like resell it back on the market, and so one thing that ended up happening was apparently they find 8 illegally smuggled West Africans. Yeah, 8 illegally smuggled West Africans dead under the house. Like they were all dead. And so they had heard about the case and these other worldly sounds, unearthly sounds, and that they didn't know what it was. And so it's believed that these West Africans, they were crying out in their native language, which is all they know. And so to us, English speakers, it sounds like something otherworldly. And so yeah, that was the case of Madame Delphine Lalaurie. Obviously that was a lot, and I hope you at least learned something new. Always have the sources down below if you ever need them. And I will see you fatal females next Friday. Bye.